Welcome to Does It Matter? Why do we think things? Why do we believe things, more importantly? Lots of reasons. Deductions, logic, bias, training, parental scripting, long-held beliefs, traumatic experiences, good experiences, all of them sort of skew us towards particular beliefs. I'm going to tackle one aspect of belief that I think is the linchpin, fundamental to how effective our beliefs are and how honest we can be in our lives with ourselves and with others. We believe things because they make sense to us, because they follow a particular pattern that suits us or suits the frame and direction of thinking that we have. Maybe suits the evidence if you're somewhat empirical minded. I'll give you one example. We choose, different governments choose to allow abortion, for example, a very controversial subject, to occur at some at 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, others 20 weeks. Some countries have no limit on when an abortion can occur. And it's because we decide at what point a clump of cells instantiates into a human being. Personally, from my frame of mind, and it seems to be reflected in some countries' choices between sort of 12 and 16 weeks, the statistical likelihood of an embryo becoming a person is much, much higher once they crack that first trimester. So in the first trimester, most miscarriages and failures to pregnancy occur. And so outside of that first trimester, trimester and a half, it becomes far more likely, much more likely than not, that that the embryo will eventually instantiate into a human being. And so we make this statistical correlation to cue our morality. And it's the only thing we can do because we're not perfect. We don't really know when consciousness activates in a human being. We see evidence for it past 20 weeks, which I think is fairly undeniable, 20 weeks onwards. So we make these rationalizations, and the rationalizations, if you're being diligent, then they're as close to the evidence as possible and less reflective of personal bias, what you'd like, and more reflective of the evidence. And so this is one of those framings. And the thing that I think about is that you have to recognize that there are weaknesses, even in a statistical framing. I tend to frame things very statistically. I look at numbers, I look at data, because I don't trust myself. I don't trust my desires and my opinions shaping the way I think. I don't like that idea. I try to avoid it as much as possible because what you want is a terrible template for what you should do. And your biases are always in operation. We always have all kinds of biases, and we're subjective beings. It's the nature of our intrinsic selves that we have biases based on all those things I talked about before, experiences and such. So shortcutting a lot of that, we can use data to do that. But even the data has its weaknesses, like we don't know when consciousness instantiates in a human being. We're choosing a statistical spectrum and going, okay, at this point in the spectrum, it's okay to destroy this cluster of cells, but it's not okay to destroy this more sophisticated cluster of cells at this point because it's far more likely to become a human being at that point. And then we're also deciding when it's a human being and when it's not without a particularly solid understanding of what makes a human being in terms of consciousness. We don't know. We don't know for sure. It's fairly logical to deduce that cellular sophistication will parallel consciousness, but we don't know that for sure. We just don't. So we're making reasonable choices and reasonable statistical choices about what we do in that area, and we do it in all kinds of areas. But even when you're choosing an empirical position that I will nearly always choose, even when you're choosing a logical position, a evidentiary position, we're still often playing on a spectrum of assumption. We're still assuming. And if you're not able to recognize that you are framing the data to some degree, that you are interpreting the data through the lens of incomplete information, not perfect information, or through the lens of your own bias, what you want or what you fear, worse still, then you're not being honest. You're not being honest with who you are. You're not being honest with your life. And it will, unfortunately, it will manifest in some pretty bad ways down the track, sooner or later. The more honest we are, the more we're aware that our thinking is flawed and that our models are never perfect and that we have to make adjustments as we go, the better off we'll be, and the better off the people around us will be as well. Like we just fall so easily into a natural arrogance, and that arrogance is driven by our desperate need to be right. Our desperate need to be right is driven by our desperate need to get what we want or to avoid what we fear. It's part of the survival reflex of the evolutionary mind. Avoiding what we fear and getting what we desire are the absolute arch enemies of thinking. They're the arch enemies of deriving intrinsic truth. So, grim as that might be, we have to somehow detach ourselves from that. And that's where looking at the data, analyzing, and being willing to confront uncomfortable truths, being willing to confront the fact that, I think abortion is okay at 15 weeks, 12 to 15 weeks, because that's when it's most likely to occur naturally in nature. And I'm framing that in a particular way. And I know that that's not 100% true. I know that's not 100% necessarily accurate. And I know that I'm operating in a gray area. Okay. But I'm a freedom person. I want people to have as much freedom as they can and have as many choices as they can. So I'm framing that information to some degree along a bias line. And it's a reasonable bias to have. If I don't recognize it as a bias, I'm lying to myself. I'm not telling the truth. We don't know everything about that subject. We don't know all the variables and vagaries. We don't have a complete understanding of consciousness or humanity itself yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. And so we're still making decisions with imperfect knowledge. And we need to know that. We're doing that most of the time in our lives. We're doing that when we assess other people, we assess our own actions, our relationships, our jobs. We're always assessing it from areas to a degree of imperfect knowledge. If we know that and we can explore, we're willing to have the courage to explore those imperfections in our thinking and our data, we can improve, we can grow. We can't do that if we become intransigent and rigid and go, well, that's what it is. This is the truth. There is no truth. There's no truth. There's just better and better models of reality, and we just try and improve them gradually as we go. Truth itself, it's kind of a furphy, because there's no end goal. We're primates living on a tiny little planet around a nondescript sun in a fairly average galaxy, part of hundreds of billions, possibly trillions of galaxies in an infinite universe. We don't have anything close to the base we would need to say we have the truth. Bullshit. We're working it out as we go. And we should admit that to ourselves, as much as we don't want to sometimes, and allow for ourselves to function in a more honest environment. It makes it better for everyone and ourselves intrinsically. And it means we can change. It means when you're 40, 50, 60, 70, you can still change your mind. You can still alter what you think. You can have epiphanies. It's really interesting to note that as people get older, you hear less and less accounts intellectually and in the clinical data of people having epiphanies and life changes. It happens less and less as we get older. We make a big deal about midlife crises and things like that, but young people go through far more epiphanies than older people do. Okay, and they need to, because they get so much wrong. But as we get older, we assume that we're not getting anything wrong. No, you've found better working balances, yes, but we become more rigid as we get older, and we're losing the ability to grow. Okay, really, really important. So if you're over 35, keep looking for those epiphanies, keep worrying away, chipping away at what you believe, because it's wrong to some degree, and you're going to find it. And then you can adjust it and make it better and lift the standard. Oos.